Chapter 9. Quarantine. Sky sat on the living room couch and watched the sun break through the clouds for the first time in a long while and smiled. She listened in on Dylan and Jesse's conversation as their low voices discussed their current model car construction over their morning coffee. Wade banged skillets onto the stovetop as he prepared to make breakfast. She glanced at him and held back a soft laugh. Wade was so noisy in the kitchen, Sky was sure he felt it a requirement. Days had passed since the battle. Time she and Jesse had struggled on their own as the men remained in quarantine after the fight. The protective gear Tom handed out before the fight hadn't been used. Though most of them had either been through the AG flu or thought they were immune, no one wanted to risk their families after the close interaction they'd had with the sick. When Sky had gotten word about Dylan's injuries, she raced to the old deserted cottage used as a quarantine center, but Wade refused to let her in. One mention of Jesse and she backed down. Sky wouldn't endanger him any more than the men would. So instead, she'd paced outside the cabin until Wade yelled out they had Dylan patched up as best they could, and he was resting. After that, she took the lead in gathering food, blankets, and other necessities for the men staying at the old place. After setting cleaning supplies by the front door, Sky stepped back and waited for Wade to open it. "Please, Wade, make sure you give the cabin a thorough washing. Especially wherever Dylan and the other injured men will be." "It ain't that bad in here, I was kinda surprised," Wade said, looking around behind him. Concern covered Sky's face. "It's been deserted for who knows how long. Animals may have been in there. Or mold. Lots of things that could cause problems." "Yeah, I'm just saying. Just say you'll clean it." Wade couldn't ignore the panic on Sky's face. "I don't know about these other guys, but you know we keep a good house. It'll be nice and germ-free." Sky's tension eased a bit. "Yes, I know you do. I'm sorry. It's just, no one really knows how to care for him." All the men had returned from the fight, but there had been injuries. 2 of them were shot. One a flesh wound, but the other more serious, and no one was sure of the extent of Dylan's wounds. But they patched them all up as best they could. Without a doctor, they all hoped what they did was sufficient. And whether it was his body healing or his sheer stubbornness, to Sky's horror, Dylan was up and moving the next day. As many of the families did, Sky and Jesse made it a habit to take dinner for Dylan and Wade to their cabin if the weather was good. Sky and Jesse would sit in the yard, close but not too close, and the men would sit near an open window to talk to each other. A couple of days after the battle, Sky spread a blanket out on the grass for her and Jesse and settled to eat. She couldn't help but wince at the deep bruising on both the men. "How are you both feeling?" "Feelin' spry enough," Wade said. "Me and Dylan were thinkin' on running some sprints today." Sky playfully rolled her eyes at him. "You'd better not. I want you both healthy and hearty as quickly as possible." She looked at Dylan. "Tricia's been using the radio to find a doctor, but she hasn't had any success yet. But she hasn't given up." "I'm fine, Sky," Dylan said. "She doesn't need to be wasting her time like that. I'm just sorry we're stuck in here. It can't be easy on you by yourself." "Hey," Jesse said, "she ain't by herself." Sky ruffled Jesse's hair and smiled. "That's right, Dylan, I'm not by myself. We are both quite capable. Don't worry. We are doing fine too." Dylan grunted as he eyed her, trying to discern her truthfulness. "How'd it go when we were fightin'? Did any show up at the cabin?" "Nope." Sky shook her head. "It was quiet as can be. We stayed tucked up in the attic, kept a lookout as we played games and watched some shows I downloaded before this all started. It was as peaceful as a spa day." Dylan gave Sky a lopsided smile. "I got no idea what a spa day is like, and I'm sure I don't want to know. But seems it went good. Morin a little surprised, but happy, you listened to me. Sky made a face at Dylan. What she didn't tell him was the deep-seated fear she'd carried all that day. How she and Jessie jumped and ran to the lookouts, not only every half hour as instructed, but with every small bump and scratch they heard. But in the long run, the most exciting thing that happened that day was Sky winning her first game of Jenga against Jessie. Sure, she was developing a skill for the game, she insisted they continue to play even as she lost every succeeding match to the boy. Finally, Sky gave up and broke out old episodes of Stranger Things she downloaded before the AG flu began. They used their precious daily allowance of electricity watching monsters as they chewed their fingernails over the real monsters Wade and Dylan fought. It hadn't been a peaceful day at all. After a couple of hours, Dylan and Wade encouraged Sky and Jessie to go home. Though the brothers were happy to spend time with them, they said it troubled them Sky and Jessie traveled on their own. When Sky finally relented, Wade followed them in his vehicle to make sure they made it back safely. The routines established the first few days of the quarantine had continued until the day they came home. Sky bit the inside of her cheek as she glanced at Dylan for the 100th time this morning. He raised his coffee cup to his generous lips and took a sip. The steam rose against his rugged face. The light bruising remaining around his eyes brought out the blue in them. He squinted just a bit as he sipped the hot liquid. Her gaze lingered on his neck as he swallowed, his Adam's apple raising and lowering with the action. Dylan's black hair was almost to his shoulders. Sky stared at it, sure it teased her, daring her to reach out and run her fingers through it. Her eyes traveled to his side. He favored it, though he tried not to show it. When he thought no one was looking, his hand often strayed to his injury, as it did now. He hadn't stayed quiet long enough. Dylan put down his coffee and looked at her. He caught her eye, a grin at the corner of his mouth. He always knows when I'm looking at him. She returned his look for a moment before turning her attention to an excited Jessie, who jabbered about their project. It was yesterday the self-imposed quarantine lifted, and the men came home. No more sleepless nights for Sky as she tried to watch over Jessie and endless days doing three people's jobs. Jessie had more than pulled his weight, but he couldn't replace two grown men. And though Sky proved to herself she and Jessie could survive on their own, it was a far less comfortable life. More than that, she had missed Dylan and Wade. Their physical presence changed the house, giving the home back the energy it lacked without them. Once their brawny bodies filled the doorway and a hello was uttered in their masculine voices, everything seemed back to normal. Their reunion was emotional. The family had been apart too long. It took an unexpected turn for Sky when her gaze met and locked with Dylan's fiery one, igniting a matching blaze in her eyes. It took everything she had to drag herself away from him and welcome Wade too. Last evening, more often than not, when her eyes strayed to Dylan, he was already looking at her. Now, once again, she dragged her gaze from his and stared out the window. Something's starting. It's been starting, and I've just been trying to ignore it. We aren't ready for this. We have too much baggage to get through yet. And too much danger at every turn to be thinking of anything else right now. Her mind flew through every lousy romance scenario that existed, ending with her and Jessie homeless and hungry, surrounded by the sick. She scolded herself, even if everything ended badly, Dylan would never throw them out. But it could still ruin so much. Sky bit the inside of her cheek as she sent a sly glance Dylan's way. The separation had increased their chemistry. It worried her. Sky loved this little family. She'd lost her own flesh and blood, these people were how she filled the empty void. She rolled her eyes at herself. All this emotional back and forth of hers was getting crazy. So, yeah, things needed to get back to normal. Sky blew out a long sigh, causing tendrils of hair to dance around her face. A bluebird flew onto the porch and sang in a sunbeam lighting up the front of the house. She and Dylan could use a distraction, and she had just the thing on this beautiful, warm day. How about a picnic?